So we're going to get started because we like to be on time at Legado and we want to make the best use of your time. So thank you all. My name is Micah Burhart. I know most of you, but what's really fun is there's brand new people who I've never met who are here, who are part of our town hall tonight. I'm the founder and executive director of Legado, and it's really an honor to have you here with us tonight. We are recording this, which I'm sure you've already figured out because you had to hit yes to be able to continue. So thank you for letting us do that. This is an interactive forum, so we want to hear from you tonight. So please, as you have questions, pop them in the chat. And then what we'll do is we'll call on you to ask that question out loud. And so, please, as things come up, put them there. We're going to kick things off tonight by premiering our brand new film, which is called Legacy. It's a 4-minute film. And what is really exciting about it is that we have the filmmaker and with us tonight, Roshni Lodhia, and I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce the film and the work that she did shooting the film with us in Mozambique and in Kenya over the winter. Roshni, you're up.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here. So excited. I'm actually in California, but I'm from Arusha, Tanzania, and it's been such a privilege to work with Legado. So the film was shot in 2 places, spent a week in Kenya and a week in Mozambique. And I think my favorite part of the film, and I hope that this is what you can see when you watch it, is the intimacy and the intentionality that Legado and your whole team has put into getting to know the people and listening to their voices. I spent 3 days in Wamba while you were doing the workshop in Kenya. And what struck out to me the most was how Legado in one of the workshops was asking about what is your future? Like, what are your aspirations? And you could tell that for so many of these people, this is the first time someone's asking them like, hey, what's your future like? It's something for us as, I think, having grown up in a different society, it's common, but there it's like someone's asking me what my future is and what that means. And I think this is so important. And I hope it again reflects in the script that we've written for the film, that if you empower the voices of the local people, then it has a trickle down effect in different society, in all aspects of their society. So, whether it's education or conservation or politics, it's like, actually, I have a voice in these sectors. So, that's my introduction, and I really hope you enjoy the film. It was so much fun to film and to put this together. So enjoy.
Yay. Thank you, Roshni. It's been such a pleasure working with you. And we are so excited for more projects to collaborate on with you together. And a lot of the beautiful imagery that you see on Legado's website that you might have seen in our annual report is also from Roshni. So not only does she do beautiful work in video, but she's an amazing still photographer. So let's share the new film. Here we go.
What if your legacy was not something you left behind, but something you create every day? What if your legacy, our legacy, creates a thriving future? Climate change is happening, and if we want lasting solutions, we need to do more than protect land and biodiversity. We need to create thriving futures, where both people and the places they call home thrive. This future begins with the indigenous peoples and local communities of our world. Their lands include 80% of the planet's biodiversity, and they're on the front lines of the effort to save our warming planet. When they thrive, we all thrive. For too long, solutions have taken a siloed approach and left out local voices. As a result, these solutions have often failed to create enduring change. Legado offers a better way. We partner with communities and use the power of legacy to activate individuals as catalysts for change, because we believe there is a leader inside each of us. Legado then works alongside community members as they collaborate to create and implement their plan for their community's thriving future. The outcome is sustainable and locally led action that fosters collaborative problem solving, adaptability, and resilience. Ultimately, communities then have the tools, resources, and partnerships to meet current and future challenges, such as those brought on by climate change. Here is what it looks like.
Inichaniwa inasi Joseph na Palaku. Inakala o Mozambique, mashisha sha o Mount Namuli, mtongo mnamona. Kana mapua inu elapo ela. Inaveto kinakala usueliwa ni muteko wa wala miri. Inu haka sikino muteko wa okusha sorera sikunya ko mwinjo sikiraka macha ni macho. Para imacha sikale ke sorel. Então vano to nuhe ninyo sinna pa koravo hinyo oravo yo kina abula ka kipuli haka kichaka na musaka na veto orwaka elapo yora kamel.
Siran tawag kaidan mayana la majong namanya Kenya awro namanya gijingai ako karnano or yesin na yun ngang gara inin kayo neso mo kara pan kat bulan no ya som na kai kanong kanya akayo ba korba bulong gara inin na ako bulong kanya am kai kanong nam na ako ko som ko bulong kanya am ko ko som ko dum gasin ko na bay do yo mandilo ningiyo.
A thriving future combines the environment, education, health, culture, governance, and livelihoods. A thriving future is our collective legacy. It's time we create it together.
This is my legacy.
Okay, that was really fun. Thank you so much for watching that. It is so powerful for me to watch it with you and to see it come into the world this way. I'm so proud of our team for creating that. So yeah, and just so many blessings to you, Roshni, for capturing the heart of our work and sharing that story in that way. I'm just so darn honored. We, we made that film in collaboration with our partners. And what was the most important thing to us was to say, what's the story you want to tell? Like, how should we explain this work so that you're at the center and it's your voice? And there's more stories like that to come. So stay tuned. And thanks for being on that journey with us about the film. So now we're going to drop into some updates about the work that we're doing. And we're going to start with Northern Kenya, where Maya and I, who you saw in the film, lives. And I'm going to bring on Tita right now, who's Legado's Director of Thriving Futures. And she just got back from Kenya like 2.5 weeks ago, and she can share what's happening there. So Tita, it's all yours.
Thank you, Micah. Could you hear me? All of you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. And hi, everyone. My name is Tita Elvira, and as Micah said, I am as Micah shared, the Director of Thriving Futures for Legado. And it's a pleasure to be here and to see so many familiar faces and new faces. So welcome. And some of you may know that I come from a background in the Andes Amazon region of South America, where I work for over the last 12 years with the Film Museum. And now it's a total privilege to work and learn with my new Samburu colleagues in Northern Kenya, as you saw in this amazing film. Our work in Kenya has been accelerating and building. And what I'm most excited about is seeing this power of legacy take off in a culture that is totally new to me. And I will say like a totally different planet for me. Monica Mbiba, who you just hear who was narrating the film, she's our senior program manager for Kenya. And she lives in Wamba, where we work and where I have spent over 3 months of the last 6 months that I've been working for Legado, been working there alongside her and with our team. And we just came back, as Micah said. In our Kenya program, we are working with almost 32,000 indigenous Samburu people who make up the Namunjak Conservancy, that is almost like 380,000 hectares, that is made out of 3 units of roughly 10,000 to 12,000 people each. And we are doing our work unit by unit, and as they are learning now, pasito a pasito, starting with the Ingelai unit. An Ingelai unit where Mayanai lives, the one you just saw and heard in the film, we have recently moved from the starting point of creating and amplifying legacy. And now we are joining this deep work on how we create these thriving futures based on those legacies. In these last workshops that we just did in Kenya, the communities identified 3 priorities, mainly integral priorities, as we call them. One related to healthcare, education, and how they manage their amazing rangelands where they live and the biodiversity that it sustains, while also connecting their livelihoods that they live on. I want to give you some examples related to those priorities, and one in particular related to community health, volunteers. Because in one of the lines of actions at the beginning, what was identified is, oh, we want more community health volunteers. And that's typical, no, we want more of something. But then that by passing through the process of Legado, of discussing, analyzing, and looking at actually the solution and the change people want to see in their communities, the participants of this workshop realized or came to a conclusion that it's not necessarily to have more community health volunteers, but because they already have some and more in some areas than others, but what is really needed is the support to do their job. So to do better the way they work. So such as transport, salaries, because they are volunteers, they need allowance, salaries, they need refresher trainings, materials, and things to do a better job and to support their communities and to have a better health service. The other priority, or another example that I wanna say here is related to the priority to rangelands management and biodiversity conservation, and is the interest of the communities to improve the sustainable livelihoods by making them diversified and totally linked to those healthy rangelands. And one example, something that you also saw in Namuli, is the honeybee production. So these are like examples that I wanted to share with you about the priorities, and of course we could talk more about them. But I also want to say something very important for me, that is that one of the things that is most important about the work that we do in Legado is that it's 100% participatory during the whole process. And we have a video here from Sebastian Lerapayo, who is one of our Thriving Futures ambassadors, who is explaining and celebrating the work that we just did in Ingelai, this true collaborative work when we supported Ingelai communities to identify the priorities and get into the path to the implementation of those priorities. So I think Lee is gonna show it.
Hi everyone, it's Legado here. We're in Namnya Conservancy, Samburu County, Kenya. We've just concluded a workshop, Legado Legacy Priorities Implementation Workshop with Ingelai unit. You can see people are happy here. It has been 3 days, 3 productive days of making a legacy plan. It is the first plan ever. In the next few weeks, we will be having the other organizations that work in the landscape. The Ingelai community will share their plan with the other organization. So we are looking forward to work with the community alongside other organizations in this landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Seba. And one thing, we really love Seba, he's amazing. But one thing that Sebastian always tells us now during this time that we have been working with him is that this is kind of the first time, or this is the first time that work like this has happened there. And there is nothing more powerful to me than to really have a community member like Sebastian tell us that this is the first time that they feel that their voices have been heard and put it at the center. So this is very important for us and very rewarding, because this is what we want to do. And this is what is showing in people. So one thing that is next up for our work is how we put together this action plan to meet these priorities, who are totally based on their assets, the community assets and strengths, and then work with them on what are the tools and the indicators of what success look like. Because is their indicator of how they see the change, how they want to see change, what kind of change they want, how we create those indicators together. And something that is very key and is part of this process is of the priority implementation is bringing together all the different actors in the landscape into this collaboration. Because instead of having everybody working independently, is how in Peru, something that we did back when we were working there is something that we call mesas de trabajo, or working groups, where community members, local government, current NGOs who are working in the area, government agencies and others, everybody sits together around the plan. So putting the community priorities at the center, so making this plan real and actionable, and people are sharing resources instead of working individually in silos. And that for us is at its heart, the heart of this is collective action. And this is what all the work that we do is all about. So I want to stop here, and there is so much to share, and I am very happy to answer any questions later. And next up to our work is to continue to the other unit called Calep. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Tita. It's really cool because when we're working where we are in Naminak, we get a chance to iterate our process, because as Sonia was explaining, we're working with 32,000 people, but divided into 3 units. So we do it in 1 unit. And then the next time we do it, not only is Sebastian and our other partners more in the lead, they're at the front of the room. They're running this process of the legacy activation and of the planning, and we keep iterating it and making it better as it grows. So one thing that's like really fundamental to Legado, and that most of you know who have been part of our community, or you'll know soon if you're new to our community, is that we are very open, that we're on a learning journey. Right? Like this is not static. No one's thriving future is static. So nor is this process static. So we really try to call people in to that collaborative space with us. I'm going to have Sonia hop in and share a bit about what's been happening on Namuli, and then we're going to get to your questions. So please pop them in the chat so that we can get to you. We had some sent to us in advance as well. And we'd also would love to hear your thoughts on the film. So if you want to speak to that, it doesn't have to be a question. It could also be what you thought of the film. Sonia, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia Kallenberg. I'm the Senior Director of Strategy and Operations at Legado. And just some background for those of you who don't know me, I joined Legado a little over a year ago. And my background is in African wildlife conservation, which is where I worked for 15 years before joining the Legado team. As you saw, well, first of all, Filipa Otevan, who is our Senior Program Manager in Mozambique, sends her regards. She wishes she would be here today with us, but time difference. So I'm going to give a brief update of what's happening at our flagship site on Mount Namuli for Filipa. So as you saw in the film, small shareholder farms are at the heart of life on the mountain in Namuli. And Legado and our partner Need Today continue to work towards strengthening agriculture, both to ensure food security and livelihoods for people and to protect Mount Namuli and its conservation value. Right now, this time of year, the rains are pretty rough. So the focus for our farming initiatives are really on maintenance, for example, of the beehives that is part of the beekeeping program, as well as on planning and research. And in particular, right now, Need Today is leading an important study to understand the drivers of potato farming. So potato farming is done sometimes in areas that are slated for protection. So that's not something that, that we want to happen. And so we're working on solutions with communities to diversify crops and close the gaps in income throughout the year that lead people to resort to potato farming up in the highlands. So that study is continuing, and the solutions are continuing working toward that. Probably the most exciting work for 2022 for Mount Namuli is preparing for Mount Namuli to be designated as one of the first community conservation areas in Mozambique. So that's super exciting. And this process is something that we've been working toward for years, both at the local level and through influencing at the governmental level as well. And 2021 was a big leap forward in this process because the Need Today and Legado worked together with communities. And a really important process that needs to happen is that communities need to have their land titled. So prior to us getting involved, there were no formal titles that were held by communities. And in 2021, we finished the process, and 100% of our focal communities now have formal land titles to their land. So what does that mean? That means that for the first time, people have security in what's going to happen to their land. And this process was also really important for prepping for the community conservation area process, because in order for the community conservation area boundaries to be drawn, we had to know where the community land was defined. So that process it took a while, but was super important, and people were really excited about it. And there were some scenes in the film where you saw community meetings and celebrating happening in Namuli, and those were those meetings that were defining the land tenure process and people celebrating when they finally got their certificates. And so now that land tenure process is finalized, Legado is poised to do what we think is maybe our most important work on Namuli, and that's really creating a community legacy plan. So our past work in Namuli really set the foundation for the work that is happening in Kenya. So it was sort of the inspiration for what we call the Legado model. The engagement process that Tita and the team there have been working on has been really important for refining that model. And what we want to do this year in 2022 is take those refinements and learning and bring it back to Namuli in order to help our efforts there, and also to continue refining the model. As Micah said, this is a learning process that we're in. And so doing this in 2022 is the perfect time, because it's critical that as the community conservation area negotiation process starts to happen, that the community is aligned with what their legacy vision is and what their priorities are as a community to go into that negotiation process, knowing their rights and knowing what they want. So it's a super exciting time, and we're really excited to roll that out this year.
Hey, thanks, Sonia. So we're going to pause here and turn it over to you all to hear questions that you have, or, if anyone wants to, anything is fair game and Legado land, so we can dive in and, or talk about the film if you have reactions about that. I know that Mike, you and Allison had sent a question in beforehand. If you want to hop online and ask that, if you don't remember it, I can remind you. It was about impact. So we know we have that one. And it actually kind of dovetails in with Annette's question. So Mike, are you up for coming on and asking the question that you had asked before? Let's see if you're here.
Why don't you just go ahead? We're having our dinner.
Well, perfect. We will tell you the answer to your question while you dine. Awesome. So Mike let me just flip to what his question had been here. So he had asked, he wanted to understand how the impact of Legado's work is measured, and with what frequency and how long does it take to see the impact on the items that are being measured. So that we can kind of dovetail that one with Annette's question about standardized indicators across Legado communities. So Sonia, you were just occupying some space, but we need you to come back because you're leading our impact team.
Sure. So that's a really important question. So thanks, Mike and Allison, for that. So we're tracking two major areas with our work. The first one is we need to ensure that the priorities that the communities are choosing are leading to important impact for them. So as Tita mentioned, in Kenya right now, they're just coming up with what their priorities are as a community. So right now we're in the process of working on methods to track progress and measurements with them. And when people talk about co-creating with communities, sort of one thing that's not often emphasized is that monitoring and evaluation has to be part of that. It's not enough just to sit with communities and co-create a plan. Part of that process has to be the monitoring and evaluation component. It's essential to have communities help design this too, because they're going to be the ones responsible for monitoring progress and adaptively managing the actions as well. So Legado helps communities get the planning, the implementation, and the monitoring process started over an intensive 3-year period with our staff sort of embedded on site. We talked about Monica being in Kenya and Philippa being in Namuli. And to your question, I think it was how long does it take to see results? So how long it takes to see impact on the priorities kind of depends on each priority. Because this is an assets-based approach, as Tita talked about, meaning that communities are focused on taking advantage of what they already have, the assets they already have. Not assets just meaning money, but assets meaning, what's available in their community, what sort of environmental assets do they have. So because we're building off of those assets, some of these impacts should be short term. So 1 to 3 years, for example, is a goal for some of our shorter term impacts rather than decades, to answer your question. So in addition to tracking the priorities of communities, that's sort of the first thing that we're looking at. It's also important that we're tracking how well our engagement process is working. So the whole point is to set communities up for success, to lead their own collective action going now and then going forward. So we want to monitor sort of how that process is happening over the 3 years where we're engaged on the ground. Right now, we're just kicking off a quarterly review process to check in with the communities on various indicators on effective collective action and sustainability. So those are going to help us not only see how we're doing, but also be able to pivot along the way and adaptively manage the progress. So if things are not on track, we can say, all right, well, there's something going on. People aren't stepping up here. How can we support them to make that happen? So that's happening on a quarterly basis to see where those indicators are. And then lastly, the title of the film is Legacy. So it's important that legacy is really important to us, as we've talked about again and again, because we are using legacy to jumpstart the engagement process in communities for individuals and for the collective community. So we're interested in understanding how people respond to this. So far, as Roshni has said, and as Tita has mentioned, our legacy curriculum has really been well received. And over again, people have said, this is the first time that an organization has asked me about me and has asked me about my future. So we're getting some interesting things from surveys, but what we really need is to get a deeper understanding of what is behind that. And so right now we're launching some focus groups. So we'll hopefully soon be able to start getting some, as Tita call it, meat to the answers, about legacy and how that inspires people and activates them within communities. So long answer, but hopefully that helps.
It's a big hairy one. That's why I gave it to you.
Thank you.
You knew it. Yay. Eric, you want to step in and ask your question? Mr. Ross?
Sure. Yeah, so my question is about in the video, one of the women said, I want my legacy to be education. I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something to that effect. So in order to actually make that happen, that could involve a number of things. And I'm just using that as an example. There could be, other possible legacies that could involve things like constructing a building, teacher training, course materials, curriculum, just a whole lot of things that maybe are outside of the scope of what Legado itself can actually do. Or correct me if I'm wrong on that. So I know you work with partners, but can you just kind of walk us through how that would happen? Do you have a partner ready to go who could say, do construction if that's needed? Or how would that work?
Awesome question. What I'd love to do is we have Ana Lemos with us, who is one of our program managers. And it would just be fun for you all to get to meet her because she's one of our newest team members who joined us, previously worked at the Field Museum.
The person who's going to be
also with Tita. And now she's here with Legado. So Ana, do you want to step in and answer the question about education?
Sure, thank you. And hi, everyone. Super great to meet you and see some familiar faces. And so I think this goes for all of our priorities. And first we get to see, like, when someone says education, it's what is the change that we want to see, right? Because we want to make sure, one, that we're meeting community priorities in the way that the communities that meets their actual needs, and that we are thinking about, so what is the change? And so through education in particular, we talked about what is like the meat to those bones, And so what we talked about was that we want our children to become good elders and leaders in the community, And so, and to do that, we have to also take into consideration that education doesn't mean that every child goes to a physical school 9 to 1 p.m. because that's not the way that the communities work, right? Some children go herding during the day, they come back at night, or they have a semi-nomadic lifestyle. And so they can't go to a physical school like we would think. And so we started thinking about, so what does that mean, right? And so one of the things that came out through this process was thinking about the most vulnerable children in the community. And those are the ones that aren't able to go to the formal schools due to this pastoral way of life. And especially now in times of drought, where families move, to where there's water for their livestock. And so in particular, in this one, the community had some good experiences with mobile schools, which are schools that a teacher would move with them, or out of school programs, which would start around 4 or 5 p.m. when the children are done coming back, from herding, or they're done with their chores. And so this is something that the community wanted to explore and wanted to talk through. And also thinking about mentoring programs for children and for teachers in other spaces that aren't necessarily a formal place where learning takes place. And so our first step is to get to that specificity and to get to the change that you want to see. And then from there, it's what Tita was saying is, so how do we start connecting these dots with either what the community can do? So what is that first step the community can take to start implementing it? Because as we were saying, these are all based on what the community can do based on the community's assets. So it's first identifying what those are, and then having that be the starting point. How do we get collaborators to come in? And not only coming in with, this is my program, this is what I want to do, but having the community members say, this is what we want, this is how we want to do it, because this is the change we want to see. And so Legado's role here is one, to provide these spaces for these kinds of reflections and these kinds of conversations where the community members are put here on the same, on the same table as a collaborator, as people from the county government, people from NGOs, and to actually meet what these needs are. And so specifically for Nigalai, where we are in that process, is to start having those conversations now, because if we would have had them a month ago, we wouldn't have had this specificity. We could have had meetings with education NGOs or at the county level, but now that we have this detail, that is our next step to start making those connections and collaborations.
So awesome, Anna. Thank you for that. Yeah. Man, I'm so proud to work with this amazing team. Tita, do you want to jump in? You guys blow me away every day. Do you want to jump in and let's see, Juliana, you had a question. Would you come online and ask that question if you're in a place where that's possible?
Yep. Hi, Juliana. Everybody. Good night. So nice to see Tita and Anna. So I'm Juliana do Brazil. I work at the Film Museum and a fan of Legado. So my question is, how does Legado work with communities to get to this holistic approach, right? Holistic priorities. How's the path to get to this? And the other question is, what's next after Kenya? What are you guys cooking in the pot for the future? And are you thinking about expanding to work in other geographies like Brazil? I'm just saying Brazil because I'm from Brazil, but don't take any location is a good location. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Juliana. Tita, it's all you.
Thank you, Juliana, for your question. And it's so great to see you again, virtually, and then in person one day. Yeah, so it's a very important question, because when we talk about the first of all, the process of Legado, what Legado means legacy. So first of all, for an individual person, when you're asking about the path, how we define what is the legacy that I want to create now, the legacy that I want to create for the future, and how my legacy influences the community at the community level. But something that I want to say here, my legacy is not necessarily, I would say, people say education, but we are not silos. We think about health, we think about our livelihoods, we think about our community work, we think about the decisions that we make, the governance systems that we are embedded in. So when we create the process for first of all, at the individual level, for identifying their personal legacy, and then how we build collective action towards a community legacy. And then with these legacies, how do we create these thriving futures based on those legacies? How do we do that? And is by creating spaces for reflection and action when people really define what their thriving future is. And a thriving future has different dimensions. And this is something, and I want to bring here, that we have learned from past work that we did at the Film Museum with Ala Kawali, who was leading the whole process there, is how well-being or thriving futures now is multidimensional. So it's not just education or healthcare or environmental health or governance or culture that is at the center. Is the interconnection between all these different dimensions that make us thrive as an individual person and as a group. So we created these spaces, and we have developed an exercise now that we call the Florecita, that is similar to the Hombrecito that we used to do at the museum before in the Amazon. And with this Florecita, we generate the space for people to think about the different assets and challenges into each of these dimensions, if we call this multi-dimensions. So for culture, how is our environmental health? How is our culture? How is our governance system? And then integrate them in a way that we need all these petals of this flower to be full of color to really thrive. So if we are missing one of these petals of the Florecita, of the flower, of the thriving future flower, we are missing out in our thriving future. So that's a way, Juliana, that we integrate the multidimensional component of a thriving future, and how the priorities are not just education priorities, as Anita was saying. It's totally rooted in culture. It's totally rooted in the landscape where people live, and it's totally rooted in how people want to continue thrive in their particular site. So just to give you that example with education and how we put together all the different dimensions for a priority that is integral. And then regarding to Jess after Kenya, wow, we want to go everywhere. But first, as Micah said, we are in the research and development. And this is a very important moment for us to be creative and innovative and learning from our mistakes and learning from our great things that we are getting, that we are accomplishing. So in this moment, we are going to be in Kenya for the next 3 years. This is our commitment, because that's the idea, how we get embedded in a landscape and support this, where our partner, our ally, to get to institutionalize, internalize this whole process and bring it on to their different landscapes where they work. So this is Kenya for now. We, as Sonia said, we are also in Namuli, and in Namuli, Mozambique. We want to be Namuli, Mozambique now, a thriving future site that starts with this whole process of how to build towards the legacy, building towards the thriving futures. And yes, we are exploring other geographies, and we love to talk about Brazil one day too. And we're exploring the Amazon, because this is a dear region there that we used to work before. And so, yeah, we are exploring other geographies. But one thing I just want to say is pasito a pasito, slow down. Let's learn, relearn, and then continue learning. It's because we want to scale, but we want to scale horizontally too. We want to scale in the different landscapes at a horizontal level. So that's what we want to do.
So what you need to understand is that everybody who speaks Samburu now says pasito, pasito, because of spending so much time with Tita. So they're all learning that that's our first Spanish term. She's sort of infamous for it. But, you know, to speak a little bit more to that question, I mean, we're really actively looking at a program either in Peru or Colombia coming up that we're really hoping to launch this year. There's been a lot of interest in our work, which has been super exciting, and also, you know, kind of brings up, you know, the pasito, pasito remark from Tita to say, hey, we are really working hard to make sure that the partners that we're engaged with right now, that they're inside of this collaboration with us, and we are sort of proving the theory of change that we have. Before, you know, if we wanted to, we could be working with 15 new partners in the next 2 months. I mean, I went from when I started Legado, I like to tell people the story, like people hanging up the phone on me routinely thinking I was pretty crazy with this idea, to now those same people saying, oh, cool, what about working with us here, here, or here? So it's an interesting time for us to navigate. And ultimately, what we are working on for a next step is to have a program in Latin America, in part because this work doesn't have to sit only in Africa. It also doesn't only have to sit in Latin America and Africa. It's really a global, we're trying to build a global model and something that can be used anywhere. And so it's important for us that we are in collaboration with partners using it across different landscapes and in different cultures. So that's pretty important to us. I'm going to hop in, and Jane, do you want to come on and ask the question that you asked?
Sure. Hi, sorry for my bad question asking on the chat, but it's fascinating to hear more about how it works on the ground. And I was just wondering, when you're saying you're learning from community to community or the groups to the groups, what are you finding with how much time people can put into that? How much time can they invest in that design session, or how you're setting the priorities? Because I grew up in a farming family, and when I was hearing 3 days, I was thinking, I don't think my farmer, how can you get away that long for 3 days?
Yeah. And especially because we're trying to call in a bunch of people. Like, we're not just saying, here are the 9 people who are the leaders of this community to show up at that legacy. We actually are actively recruiting diverse voices, women, youth, typically marginalized voices, to all come to the table. And how we solve for that is we pay people, right? Like, we pay people an agreed upon per diem. We put them up for their lodging. We feed them well. We try to do everything we can to take care of them and honor them for their time, to acknowledge that, like, that's an asset that they are bringing to the table with us. So it's not, hey, can you add this to your already very full life? It's, how can we support and honor you so that we can be in this dialogue together? Now, one thing for those of us who worked in international work, per diems can be a pretty controversial subject, right? Like, and there are different variations of that. So what we work really hard on is to say, we're paying real world per diems based on like what is a fair rate for you to be here, not an inflated per diem, especially if we're having, someone who's like a high level government official and saying, look, we're not going to double down on what your salary should be for today for you to come and do this work that's actually part of your job. So we're navigating those pieces of the puzzle, which, let me tell you, is a pretty fun conversation to have sometimes one-on-one and collectively. So that's really how we're handling that. And what we found, Jane, is that if anything, more people want to show up, right? And they don't want to show up to just say, sweet, I made the money for the day, because that's not at all how it works. Like, we had, after our first big legacy push, I mean, this is what happens organically, is people just get so fired up and drawn into this. They're like, when do I get to go through the legacy program? So one of the things we do is we start working on how we share that back at the village level. So it doesn't have to be about coming to a central location and adding the transport piece and the whatnot. So yeah, that's pretty integral.
That's cool. Yeah. I'm glad you paid. That's really cool.
Yeah, it has to be that way. And, we've also looked at, so far there haven't been barriers. I mean, when we were running this program, the first program in November in Kenya, you had moms nursing their babies there, right? And so, it's like, do we need to think about like what a childcare setup can be? Because again, like, what are the barriers to getting all the people who need to be a part of this at the table? And that's something we are actively like in the intersection of handling. So.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. I want to hop to, hold on a second. The question that Chad had. Chad, can you hop on and ask the question you had about what's hard?
Sure. Let me see. Did that work?
Yeah.
Okay. Basically the first observation I had was that it's such a strong team and vision with the Legado group that they seem to make everything look so easy, when there's got to be so much hard work before handling the groundwork and things like that. So my question is really, what are the sources of friction or resistance, particularly from a human dimension?
When you say the human dimension, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, like not storms or.
Got it. Oh yeah. Okay. So now I'll answer this one because I've probably had the most challenges since I started this in 2011 with $11,000 in a crate. So, along the way, one of the challenges has been convincing people to try this, but that's no longer a challenge that we have, which is pretty cool to be at that point. A challenge that we have right now is making sure that we're partnering with the right people to do this. And what that means is that this process, what Tito was sharing with you, like it's a 3-year process that we do in partnership with a local organization. In Kenya, that local organization is the Naminak Community Conservancy and the Northern Rangelands Trust. Like we basically become a family together. So one of the challenges is to say, are you really ready? This is not a workshop. This is not just like check a box. We send you a PDF, we're good to go. This is really about a fundamental shift for how you're working. So when we pick our partners, the challenge is like, how deep do you go in that vetting process to make sure that that partnership is really ready for this, right? And that like you want to get into this long-term relationship, and then sort of the therapy that you're doing alongside that relationship, because what you're kind of like living and breathing and modifying with it together. So one of the things is we've been learning along the way as we've had different partnerships over the past, I don't know, what has it been, 8 years since Legado has been working full time in this way, to say, okay, that's what went really well there. That's what came off the rails. Another challenge that we had, frankly, and I was sharing this, I'm at an event in New York for the Skoll World Forum, and someone was asking me a similar question to this. And I said, hey, one challenge that actually informed how we do it is when we started talking about healthcare on Namuli, we said, oh, okay, we understand that this is a priority. And then we stopped talking to community members about the solution. So instead of including them, as Tita was saying, in participatory way the whole time, we stepped out of that conversation. And guess what happened? Wires got crossed, signals got misunderstood. And suddenly we were back on our heels about like, well, where's this thing you said you were going to deliver? Wait, we didn't say we were going to deliver this. Well, hold on a second. And so by taking it away onto our table and not sharing that space, we made a mistake. And that actually led to a fundamental part of our work, which is our goal is to backstop the indigenous and local people that we work with to come up with these solutions, and then to lead the way on the solutions, that we don't go solve it for them. So, like that, those are a couple examples of some things that have come up along the way and how we've handled it.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. I got a little distracted. So Lee, I might need you to run the next question.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Jarrett put a question in the chat. You just answered the first half, but it's a two-part. So I asked him if he would be up for sharing the second half.
Hi, everyone. Great to see Tita and Ana again, former colleagues of mine, and Alika. And wonderful to learn more about the great work that you all are doing. My first question actually was a little bit more about the specific communities themselves rather than the partners. Like how does the selection of the community, and I guess it's related to the selection of the partner, how does that fit into like a broader vision for the landscape at higher scales? And how does that relate to the vision that government agencies or government authorities have for the region, which is kind of my second question. How have you been thinking about building these relationships with the government authorities in that area as part of the strategy for implementing priorities? I know that that's something that in the Field Museum work, as there are a lot of lessons learned that Tita and Alika and others have had in terms of connecting these different sectors. So I was just curious how that's been going.
Tita, that feels like a good one for you.
Thank you. And thank you, Chris. And so great to see you again. Yes, I think for your first question, yeah, I know that Micah responded. We kind of responded in certain ways. One is to choose the partner, and then the landscape where the partner is, no, and then the communities where we work, where we actually work. So one thing too, and we are being very diligent, and this is Sonia's very important role on also what is our vetting strategy, what is our vetting document, and our vetting principles on how to decide where to work and how to work with. But the where to work has a lot of implications. No? You just imagine a list. No? Who is the partner? What is the site? What are the experience of this partner of working in this territory? With this also a triangulation of understanding what it is. But also something key here too, first of all, for us as Legado, we work in biodiversity, areas of high biodiversity, where there are indigenous and local communities. And one of the things that we also want is that these people have certain kind of tenure, no, like security of their territories, so they could really thrive in these spaces, or the process of how to get that security, as you saw in Namuli. So that's I just want to say that as a very important thing. Also, that is important for us, and you might know me as being Colombian, security in the space, security in the landscape, security in the territory. Because as you know, this is a long-term process of being embedded in the landscape. And we don't want to have a risk for the communities who participate in this process, and also a risk for the team who comes from the outside. And of course, we look at assets, and assets not necessarily as cash, because it's important, the resources of cash, but also the capacity, the knowledge, the way that our partners have on how to get engaged and involved, and also the commitment towards the future, to internalize and institutionalize this process towards the future. So that's just one big thing in a nutshell. But also when you say what to choose the communities that you work on, they are part of this bigger landscape. Here, if I do a comparison, we work with several people here. The scale is bigger than we have. To give you an example, for those of you who don't know, in the Amazon, we used to work with the smaller communities, smaller populations. Here, we are, in a way, we use scaling horizontally and vertical too, with a bigger number of communities. So that's what's so important, what Micah was saying. Who are the people who are coming to the spaces where we create these spaces for reflection and action, like the workshops? But then how these people are selected, who are they? So all the voices should be included, should come. We wish the 10,000 will come, but it's impossible. But who are they? But what are the processes that we create for this information to go back, and for this information to be in everybody's mind, and realizing that is this their plan? It's not the plan of the 100 people who came to the workshop. It's the plan for Ingilite communities. So in that way, if we think of not per se community per se, but more, I see it in comparison to the landscape where the communities are at, and they use the spaces. And when you were asking, Chris, about the relationships with the government and the government authorities from the local, regional, and national, we are in the process of, we are doing that. And this is also because our lesson learned from other landscapes where we used to work. So in this process, in particularly in Kenya, that I could talk for because I've been so embedded in it, is that the village representatives who are, there's one thing, let me go back. Kenya has very interesting governance systems, very parallel. The ones that are directly from the president, the ones that are a county government, that are regional, and then you have the conservancy level governance system. So we really need to understand how that works, and who are the people, if you think, at the table who make decisions at those governmental levels. Something very key for us is that they have been part of this process, because in Kenya, it's very important for them, and I really like that these authorities are being invited, and are being invited to the workshops and are part of the workshops. And something that was key in the last 2 workshops that we just did in March, in the February and March, is that the Samburu County Administrator, that in a way is like the mayor of the whole territory of Samburu East, was the 3 days there at the workshop. And he was really amazed at the proceso, because he said, look, in October, I need to develop the integrated development plan of the county. And in a way, you are doing the work for me. You know, like, he didn't say it like that, but it's like, these priorities are right on point. This is what we need to support when we do the integrated development plan. So it was very important for us, because this is the table that we want to create, but this guy was at the table since the beginning. And that's very important. And also a representative from the president of Kenya, happy to be, was there too. So he said, oh, that's a process that I really understand and I really want to be part of. The thing now is how to hold them accountable. Because that's the most important thing. It will be blah, 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 but now it's like, you were there, you say this. And he also sent, the administrator sent all the head of their departments to participate in the workshop and talk about the different, and you think multidimensional, no? Of health, education, rangelands. So that's awesome. How you could put them together.
I'm going to jump in for a moment, and then I'm going to throw this to, we have a special guest tonight, Mary Sue Vorbrick, who was on our trip in November, because I want to end with that. But first I want to answer Jill's question. So Jill just asked about an exit strategy and for at the end of this. And what's really important to share with you all is that the way Legado is working right now in terms of the pasito pasito approach, but also how we're scaling it is, for example, in Kenya, where we're working with one conservancy that's nested in a cluster of 42 conservancies. So what our goal is that we're rolling this out in one of those conservancies, but then it very intentionally grows to other ones. So the way we work, and if you remember at the beginning of the hour, we talked about how there are these 3 units in Kenya. The first time through, this is brand new with our partners, with everyone. The second time through with our second unit, we're now co-teaching all this work. The third time through, we're in the back of the room while our partners are driving this. So we bake in getting ready for that quote unquote exit while we're inside of this 3-year deep embedded relationship. But after that 3 years, it's not sayonara, Legado's out of here. It's, hey, now we're creating thriving futures together. And now we're in this global consortium driving this needle and learning from each other. So that's not only how we're scaling, but also how we're supporting how this work continues to happen and continues to roll out. So what I'd love to do now is Miss Mary Sue, to have you come and join us. So we run trips with people who get really fired up on our programs and want to come see what it's like in person. And Mary Sue has not only been to Kenya this past November, but she's also been to Mozambique. So we thought it would be really fun for her to come on and just share some reflections she has in our closing minutes about what it's like to come on a trip with Legado, because we would love for all of you guys to join us on these trips as we go forward, because there's no better way to jump in than to jump in. All right, Mary Sue.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I think I was supposed to be on earlier, but I was shuttling a child to a trap shooting thing, which doesn't happen near my house, amazingly. So in any event, I had a great time in Mozambique and in Kenya with Legado, and it's so fun to see Tita and Roshni on this call. Haven't seen you, yeah. So the two trips were quite different. I won't spend time talking about Mozambique because that was in 2019, but just to put it in perspective, that was a trip to go check on a team that was in place and kind of further along in the process. And while Pete and I were there, and we were there with our younger daughter, Frances, I thought it'd be cool to see this whole startup concept. Like, really, you went around like hut to hut looking for people and they actually showed up at this hotel, and how did that go down? And you can't speak the language. And so we ended up in Kenya, seeing that at work, and it was really interesting. We flew in and we spent a couple days, just so you get a lay of the land of how the trip works. We spent a few days at the Lewa Conservancy, which, if you've ever done any kind of photo safari kind of stuff in Africa or have a vision of what that is, that this is closer to that. The Lewa Conservancy, there are very few people. It's set up for the conservation of animals. Lots of great, hippos and amazing number of rhinos and, extraordinary wildlife like you'd expect. But then we flew to Wamba, where there is no tourism, like none, zero, and met Roshni and Tita and the whole team, Monica and others. And that's where we were doing our work. And that was an interesting experience in that it was, there's nothing that couldn't, everything had to be authentic. It was like, it's Wamba. It's a dirt road and you walk into town at night to buy your beer, and they're like really helpful, but they have no idea. We can't communicate at all, but international sign language goes a long way. It's great. And then it was really great we were able to do hiking both at the Lewa Conservancy and in Wamba, which I mentioned only because if you all have been on other African outdoor adventures, often you can't walk because, you're prey. But in these locations, it was nice because we were able to do a lot of hiking, and we were able to go out and see, they're pastoralists, so they're out with their herds, and you could just really see where they lived and how they worked with the herds. And it was just a really, again, I hate to, maybe it's overused, but it was very authentic. It was very real. It was very raw. It was, it's not scripted by anybody for tourists. And then the work that we did was amazing, because the team had orchestrated everything. And the Legado team had, worked on stuff. And then when we went to present, Pete and I were able to help. At the beginning, we kind of sat in the back and observed and saw how it went down. But as the days went on, we were able to do more and more. And the people who were there, I think, got used to seeing us there and thinking that we were part of the program, and that was okay. And it was just really empowering to see everything that Micah is trying to do in the whole Legado team. Like, how does that really unfold? Because it just, if you hear about it, you know, from the outside, it seems really untenable that you would really like walk around and just get community leaders to show up somewhere that's like hours from their home and, you know, pick up and decide that they're just going to spend 3 days there. But these people they were so engaged. And, you know, even with all of the not educational, but language, I would say barriers, but eventually you just kind of got used to it being spoken and then translated. And it was really interesting too to see leaders emerge from within the group. There were a couple people who came and clearly you could identify them as the leaders, both men and women. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, I mean, Micah and the team do a really good job of trying to make sure that they get, you know, a high representation of women there. And then during the facilitation of the 3 days, we made a marked effort to make sure to elicit the voices of the women in the community. And by the end of the third day, you could see that really, like, even in the context of 3 days, made a huge impact. And there were particularly young women who you could tell were coming into their voice, and they may not have done that because it's very much a male-dominated tribe. So
Mary Sue, you rock. I'm going to pause you here because I just noticed that we are over time.
Okay, sorry. I can just keep going on.
I know.
Sorry.
Like one of them. No, don't be sorry. You're like, you're such a good advocate. What I want to share with people is that we're here for questions. There are still some questions in the chat we didn't get to answer, but I will follow up with you and answer them. And if there are more, you all know how to reach out. And not only to me, but if you want to speak to someone else on our team, you know, we have, you know, it's pretty easy to find us, and I'm happy to put you in touch. So if you're like, hey, I really love Tita's answers, can I take a deeper dive with her? No problem. So please grab us. We'd love to have some of you join us in Kenya. For those of you who are new to Legado, thank you for taking the time to learn about the work we're doing. And for those of us who are part of our community, whether it's people like Jackie and Kate who've been here since the beginning, or people who are newer to this community, thank you. These are my favorite. I feel really, really fortunate and really honored that you are our people. So thank you for being our people, and thank you for being here and asking us the big questions and the tough questions and celebrating legacy and being on this journey with us. And enjoy the film. We'll send you a follow-up link so you can watch it again. You can share it with your family, share it with, you know, your neighbor down the street who happens to have an amazing family foundation that aligns exactly with what Legado is doing. We'll take it. We'll do it all. And yeah, good night, everyone. Thank you.